know where your keys are. Most of you do, but I saw some of you checking your pockets or purses. We all know that feeling, that second of panic before we can put our hands on something as vital to our well-being and safety as our keys. We all know what it feels like to lose our keys. Without them, we're dependent on other people for access to things that we should be able to expect to access on our own. Houses, offices, transportation, even the bathroom. If we lose our keys, we lose control over those parts of our life. Becoming disabled is a lot like losing your keys, only you never get them back. In the bigger picture of our lives, we are all temporarily abled. If we remove the outliers, those who die young and those who live to old age without developing a disability, we are left with a very large percentage of the human population who will, at some point, meet the clinical definition for disabled. That is, to have a physical or mental limitation that is life-impacting, making it difficult or impossible to interact with the world or do certain expected daily activities. While the overall rate of disability in the US hovers around 13%, as the body ages, that percentage rises exponentially so that by the age of 75, 46% are reporting some disability. Based on my own experiences with internalized ableism, and according to the federal government's Office of Equal Opportunity Employment, that is likely an underreporting. Disability statistics are, after all, based on self-reporting, and such self-reporting is stigmatized. Regardless, if you live long enough, you have a significant possibility of requiring disability-related assistance. What does that assistance look like? Just like the idea of keys, we know disability accommodation when we see it, don't we? While you are certainly picturing the more familiar things, such as the wheelchair icon, or the sign on the bus telling you to relinquish your front seats for people with disabilities, what you don't picture is even more important. If I step off my mobility scooter, prop my cane in a corner, you are unlikely to picture me. I don't look disabled. If I put aside my assistive devices, my needs become invisible. And because even though such things are prevalent in our society, unless and until we need to use them, they are easy to overlook. We do not think about where our keys are until they are lost. While keys are personal, access is systemic. To extend the metaphor, what keys we have in the first place are an extension of what accesses we have been granted by realtors or landlords, by workplaces or building management, by the bank that gave us the loan, and by the dealer who accepted that loan for a car. Similarly, our bodily access to the spaces in our lives is determined by the federal government, the state government, and this university. Here you see a selfie I took in front of the building that houses my department, Lafayette Hall in the School of World Studies. Regrettably, it does not also house me. I can't access the building. I have the genetic condition Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, generally known as EDS. EDS is a malformation of collagen proteins, which is bad news bears because every system in the body contains collagen in some form. From our eyes to our nerves to our skin and bones, collagen is the matrix onto which other tissue is deposited. And my collagen machine is broken. In May 2023, I took a short vacation to a seaside resort in Puerto Rico. When I got home, I found that walking on the beach during the trip had accelerated the EDS-related nerve damage in my feet and legs. It was now too painful to walk. I did not walk other than to the kitchen or the bathroom for 4 days afterward. Since then, I've only walked more than a few blocks at a time if there's no other alternative. I also should not climb stairs anymore. They're a trip hazard due to the nerve damage in my feet. If I can get up them, I have to leave my mobility scooter somewhere and hope that it's not damaged or stolen before I come back. It is physically, practically, and legally my legs now. To be without it would be devastating. Thus, I cannot be with my colleagues in Lafayette Hall. Now, we could talk about me all day, but that's actually antithetical to my point. Accessibility is a systemic issue. And what systemic solutions do we have? Well, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Specifically, the ADA states that employers and schools, including VCU, need to provide reasonable accommodations for individuals who either have or are perceived to have a disability. Great, right? In theory. Accommodations for everyone who needs them. What else could we possibly want? Well, regrettably, while the ADA is great in theory, it's not actually that great in practice. There are two parts to why: the reasonable accommodations clause and the lack of funding for it. On the surface, reasonable accommodation sounds reasonable. We don't want to ask for and they demand unreasonable things. However, cost is factored into the definition of reasonableness. Both the cost to a disabled individual's department, where oftentimes accommodations are taken out of the overall departmental budget, and the cost to the institution as a whole. Additionally, accessible infrastructure is often impeded when other issues such as renovations take precedence. Ironic, to say the least. Furthermore, accommodations can be denied or pared down if there are more cost-effective workarounds, hence why my office is in a different building. This is, in fact, a reasonable accommodation. To house me with the rest of my unit, one of two things would need to happen. The entire unit would need to be moved, or the building would need to be retrofitted with a ramp and an elevator. My current office is in Hibbs, which is accessible by elevator and push-button access door. Sometimes our wonderful students even hold the door for me. Yet the fact remains that the ADA and our response to it is inadequate. Let's go back to that 13%. There are an aggregate of 5,300 faculty and staff at VCU, and 13% of that equals out to 689 people. That's not to say that there are that many disabled workers at VCU, statistics and probabilities being what they are. But if there were that many, it would be enough to fill the space we are in to capacity twice over with people left standing outside. And yet we continue to treat this reactively instead of proactively. The reason for this reactive nature is the inadequate funding of the ADA. The government has said that businesses need to accommodate people with disabilities, but has no provision to pay for or reimburse anything that needs to be bought, installed, or altered. The cost of any requested accommodation is an argument for its unreasonableness and can lead to the business denying its implementation. If one is denied accommodation, then in order to access accommodations that a business deems unreasonable, one must bring an ADA case to the courts, showing necessity and reasonableness. Doing so is expensive, time-consuming, and creates ill will with no guarantee the plaintiff will win. Therefore, most of the time, the disabled person's recourse is limited to politely asking for accommodation and hoping the business does the right thing. If the plaintiff does manage to win, the business will need to pay out of pocket for renovations or equipment to accommodate them. So it is in the business's best interest to win or to avoid court in the first place. This is borne out by the language used in VCU's diversity website's explanation of their goal. Quote, VCU is committed to operating each service, program, or activity so that when viewed in its entirety, each is accessible to and usable by individuals with disabilities. The key here is in the phrases each service, program, or activity, and when viewed in its entirety. This creates a difficulty of access that is now the responsibility of the individual. It is putting a systemic problem on the individuals with disabilities. Here's where the ADA fails to address the systemic nature of access needs. Were we to take the earlier example of 689 people and place them on the compass rose in front of Cabell, this would not look like an individual problem. It would be distinctly visible as a systemic one. Yet services, programs, and activities are only required to be accessible to individuals. Large businesses like VCU are, for the most part, pretty decent at accommodating most of the people who need it. We are encouraged to discuss our needs informally and see what adaptations are already in place. And in a lot of cases, that is enough to serve individual needs. For less generic needs, there are formal procedures beginning at the department level and moving upward as necessary. And in fact, all of this is written right into our strategic mission and our budget in the section titled Diversity Driving Excellence. Quote, one of the key questions raised in the recalibration was how to better weave diversity, equity, and inclusion into everything we do at VCU. This sounds like a good question to ask, doesn't it? Then why am I here in front of you today? I'm here to answer that question of how to better weave the core principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion into our lives at VCU, because the way universities currently address disability still makes it an individual problem to be solved by the individuals it affects. We stand at a crossroads, particularly in light of recent research on long COVID's disabling effects, where we could pursue systemic changes to our university. We could be the first to create a campus that deliberately and systemically dismantles barriers caused by infrastructure which is set up to treat disability as an individual problem. We could modernize our campus to meet the standards of universal design by such methods as retrofitting buildings for elevator access, providing push-button access to doors and bathrooms, removing curb steps into buildings and replacing them with ramps, and repairing or replacing brick or concrete sidewalks that have been broken by tree roots. Because at some point, we are all gonna need these things to be better. What then is standing in our way? Money, of course, and perception. That perception, I continue to mention that this systemic problem is the responsibility of the individual. While much of the VCU budgetary system is beyond my comprehension, there appear to be two ways to requisition renovations for campus buildings. The Repair, Replacement, and Renovation Reserve, for which any department can request to be pulled from their own operating budget for repairs below a certain amount, and the University Renovations Office, which handles requisitions above that amount. Both of these, however, require that a problem be identified and brought up by an individual. There appears to be no systemic evaluation of campus buildings to mark them for an accessibility overhaul. This can and should change. Instead of requiring individuals to ask for help, we could dedicate more than words to the effort. We could dedicate money and action. We could use this opportunity to remove locks that keep us from the access points for everyone, not just those who ask, making this and all other campuses not only welcome, but inviting. Because in a location without locks, no one needs to worry about having lost their keys. Thank you.